Well, I'm so excited to have you join us with this conversation with Drs. Bill and Kristi Gaultiere. Now, I was at the American Association for Christian Counselors World Conference, and Jeff and I were invited to the President's Luncheon, and I sat down at the table, and next to me was this beautiful woman with such a humble and just a gentle spirit. I started talking with her, and I realized that it's Dr. Kristi, that she's going to be on our podcast, and so we just had such a kindredness as we were talking about the heart of leaders and pastors, and having both the backdrop of psychology and the therapy training, as well as the biblical and the spiritual formation training. And so I love their hearts. Excited to have them on the conversation here about emotions. They talk quite a bit about the Enneagram. That is their passion. And I just want to tell you that the reason Jeff and I don't really engage the Enneagram is because we really hunker our entire organization and our relational health around the core values index. And the main reason we do that, you'll hear us in another podcast at some point here recently where we walk through the core values. But the main reason we do that is mainly because of the research and the quick palatability of the CVI, meaning it's very tangible. People digest it quickly, and the reliability of it, meaning it's 97% reliable. And so the Enneagram is beautiful. And how I often help people understand is that the Enneagram really is helping you understand a lot of your childhood woundings. And so I think it's often our family of origin and the story that we've experienced with our core values index, and the combination creates our Enneagram number. That is my way. There's no research, but as I've sat with both instruments and quite a few other assessments over 20, I really respect the Enneagram. I asked some really hard questions of Dr. Bill and Kristi, and they handled them beautifully. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as we talk about the role of emotions, as well as a bit of the Enneagram and spiritual direction and formation. So welcome to the conversation with Bill and Kristi Gaultiere.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast, helping leaders live with integrity.
Okay, so today we're talking about emotions. It's actually one of my favorite topics because it's a huge part of my own journey and my own story. If you've been around a while, you know that. But you either love them or you wonder why the heck they exist and what's the point to them. And so today we're going to talk with some wonderful guests who really have come to speak to the power, the impact, and maybe God's perspective on why emotions matter and how they can be a part of not only our healing, but our growing, our spiritual and our human development. We have Bill and Kristi Gaultiere, who are both doctors of psychology, which is really fun to have a husband and wife team, who are founders of Soul Shepherding. It's a ministry that helps pastors and leaders and churches of all those actually desiring to thrive in Jesus in their emotional and relational health. Their new book, Healthy Feelings, Thriving Faith, uses the Enneagram to help you grow in emotional health and loving relationships and intimacy with Jesus. So we are going to talk a bit about the Enneagram. We don't do that often on this podcast because we often use the core values index, but we value the Enneagram and its role. And many of you love the Enneagram, so you're going to be so excited. Some of you are leery or don't know anything about it. So we'll hopefully clarify some of that for you today. So it's so good to have you, Bill and Kristi. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Tara. So good to be on the Living Wholehearted podcast with you.
Well, let's talk a little bit just about you two. Story matters, and it often shapes why we're doing what we're doing, especially for us leaders who feel very clear about the call we're in and trying to help in the expertise. So you have a unique lane. Talk about your stories and how you got to this place.
Yes. Well, Bill and I met when we were in college. We both shared in common a real devotion to Jesus, a desire to grow deeper in our intimacy with Jesus. But also, both of us were raised in the church and Christian families, very blessed by that, received a lot of great grace in the church and great training. But we also experienced being hurt by people that didn't understand emotion, people that were repressing emotions, reacting to emotions, shutting them down, and leading to isolation or wearing a lot of masks. And that was something that we were really wanting to understand like you, living wholeheartedly this abundant life that Jesus calls us to, and why we were seeing areas where in our discipleship and the discipleship of others in our communities, there were these holes in the soul. And at the time, the way to grow to understand that was to study psychology. Spiritual formation didn't exist as a study option for us at the time. We later have gone back and studied spiritual formation and really integrate spiritual formation and psychology. But that was the call that God had for us. And then in private practice for many years together, walking with people, learning more and listening to their stories, and spending between the two of us over 100,000 hours in the pool of pain with people was another education in and of itself. As well as God really had called us to continue to minister in the church in various roles as pastors. So we have real heart for pastors and leaders and some of the unique temptations and sufferings and pains in that journey as well. And all of that has led us to what we do today with soul shepherding.
Some of the big challenges that we've encountered as we've talked with people is that so much of the Christian teaching that we get boils down to believe and do.
Right.
Believe what's right, do what's right. Believe what's right, do what's right. Certainly what we believe and do is really important, but you and I are more than a brain on a stick. We're living souls. We're people created in the image of God, and there's a lot more to us than only what we believe and do. And so we have hearts, and we have emotions, and we have relational interactions, and we have habits, and all these things work together in our spiritual formation and our soul care. And so that's a big part of the work that we do in our soul shepherding ministry, and why we wrote our book, Healthy Feelings, Thriving Faith.
I love it. It is interesting. Like, I think realizing that we can have relatively healthy systems, whether they're our church culture that we grow up in, our family systems that we grow up in, and think, I had a good childhood. And yet there's this missing element of, but we didn't really know how to connect on an emotional level. And in many ways, theology, the church, capital C, would maybe even teach against that, right? Like, above all else, guard your heart. And also, the heart is deceitful and is going to lead you astray. So speak a little bit about the premise around emotions. Just give a general idea to our listeners of why they're good, what's the purpose of them, and how do they really help create a more whole, healthy system. Okay, I threw a lot at you, but so you have a half hour.
Well, love it. All of it's so important, Tara. God created us with emotions. It's part of the image of God in us. God is emotions. We read that in the Bible. And so it's a mistake, and it's a misreading of Scripture to pit emotions against faith, or to give thinking and reason a more prominent place in our discipleship to Jesus than our emotions. Thinking and feeling exist side by side, and there are two ways of knowing, two ways of making decisions, two ways of relating to people and to God. So important what we think, but also so important our emotions and understanding our emotions. I did a Bible study on the emotions of Jesus. So much of what we do in soul shepherding is we go to Jesus. We really bring a Jesus-centered psychology and spiritual formation central to how we think, how we live, and how we teach. And so studying the life of Jesus in the New Testament, there are 39 different Greek words that are used to describe the emotions that Jesus, the human being, had. And so Jesus dignifies our emotions. And in our book, Healthy Feelings, Thriving Faith, we show you the emotions of Jesus on every page, and we help you relate to Jesus because Jesus is relating to you. And so we look to Jesus like a mirror to understand the things that we are feeling, not only emotions of distress, but also positive emotions.
God created us in his image. He has emotions as well. And we see emotions also in Scripture in the Old Testament. The Psalms is a key place where we see a lot of emotionally honest prayers, as the psalmist talks about feelings of anger, of fear, of despair, shame, And we see the way that he also exhibits positive emotions of hope, of joy, of faith, and of peace. And these are a part of having a thriving and healthy faith and relationship with God. As we were studying and getting our doctorates in psychology, one of the things in our coursework very much was human development. And one of the things that we understand, and we've written about this in our book, Journey of the Soul, is that as we develop, we actually develop emotionally before we develop cognitively. And we see this in babies. We have grandchildren, and our little grandchildren, they exhibit emotions very early on before they're able to exhibit or to communicate any thoughts. So emotions are primary, not that they're more important, like Bill said, side by side. And we want to bring both into good service of us, not either to master us.
Yeah.
So our feelings can assist our faith. They're not, faith and feelings are not necessarily opposed to each other.
Yeah, it's so important. Even when you think about how God designed, he's the one that created our human development, and the idea that these little newborns all the way to almost our early 20s, we're highly emotional, sensory oriented people and develop our cognitive reasoning brain through those, early teens all the way to our early 20s. And one of the things, someone will say, I had such a wonderful family, and they're having a hard time connecting to their emotions. And they love God. They love the scripture. They know the scripture. But this might be something they would have seen or felt in their home, where they needed to, mom or dad would have said, when you are done throwing your temper tantrum, then I will engage you. Or kind of sending them to a timeout and getting themselves under wraps, or obey over those emotions that are flooding. And so this new way of thinking about how to think about our stories and where emotions were nurtured or where they were suppressed is a really important piece for us leaders to understand and what we're comfortable with. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share a little bit about maybe your own stories and how you were aware of where emotions were missing. I think a lot of people aren't sure. They're like, I had a great home. Why is this a big deal? I mean, we definitely see it in abusive homes. You're like, oh yeah, that's a problem. But in most relatively healthy homes and healthy Christian systems, it doesn't feel like a problem until it's a problem. So hone in on some good examples.
Well, I was born with someone who is highly sensitive. I am an emotional. I'm an F on the Myers-Briggs, a feeler. I am someone who feels emotions deeply and greatly. And I was born into a family of thinkers. And none of them felt emotions as strong as I did. And they didn't know what to do with my emotions. And so my mom would say things like, snap out of it. I'd be sent to my room or locked in the car when I exhibited emotions. It felt out of control and scary to my parents. They didn't know what to do with my emotions. So I internalized that, feeling very abandoned by them and also feeling a lot of shame for having so many emotions and not understanding why I couldn't be so cognitively minded and driven as they were, why their thoughts were so seemingly powerful to them and so seemingly weak to me in comparison to my emotions. So this was an experience very early on for me and my family where I began to feel very much rejected, very much not wanted, very much misunderstood, and like I just didn't fit, and in shame, feeling like I needed to try to learn to hide my emotions. And in that, really working to develop a very strong and sophisticated defense mechanisms and false self.
In many ways, my childhood was the opposite. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and there were a lot of emotions in my home that other people had, my siblings, my parents. And so I learned to really not have emotions and to think and do all the time and to be very strong-minded and to work hard. And emotions just sort of got in the way. A lot of ways I was raised on the football field and baseball field, basketball, and playing sports. And so you learn to just grit it out and be strong and keep charging in to score the touchdown, no matter how you feel, and get back in the game. You get an injury, rub some dirt on it. And so I was not in tune with my emotions. I could tell you what my mom felt or what my sisters felt, but I didn't know what I felt.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I was in college studying psychology that I really began to learn that, oh, I do have emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's why I lose my temper, or that's why I get tired, or, oh, that feeling in my stomach, that's called anxiety. And so I had a professor that took me under her wing and really listened to me and gave me empathy. And so I started learning the language of emotions. And thank God I did, because I met Kristi, a highly sensitive person, deeply emotional, and I was able to understand you and relate to you and learn so much from you and your emotional intelligence.
Isn't it funny how God's kind of clever that way? He kind of seems to pair us up with people that could either go like a wildfire, right, and create all kinds of more woundings, or can be a part of the healing if we let him. So I love that. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, you're speaking, Bill, to what I call the athlete mentality. I'm like, there's so much good. I'm an athlete. Our whole family are athletes. I grew up with that. No pain, no gain. But it took years for me to learn the difference between when am I, sore emotionally and when am I injured? And do I even know the difference? Because again, I played on injuries all the time just because that's what you do. And so we have these cultural norms, even in our spiritual formation, that push us past what God never asked us to do. So you guys speak about 4 key emotions in your book. Why don't you name those, and why did you focus just on those 4? Because we know we have an array of emotions, but I'm sure you had a very clear reason of why you honed in on the 4.
Yeah, the 4 core emotions are anger, shame, anxiety, and sadness, particularly the emotions of distress. And you've got love, joy, peace, power, faith, and trust. Now, these are not just emotions, they're conditions of being. We think of faith as being, like we're saying, opposed to emotion, but the word faith means trust. And so it naturally will include some emotion. Love is more than an emotion, but includes emotion, joy, peace, et cetera. So we talk about the positive emotions as well, and how in each personality type, how we can cultivate positive emotions through our relationships with God and each other and our thinking. But a lot of how we get into greater emotional health and love and joy and peace is by working through these emotions of distress. And so we just found over the years working as therapists and then working in the church and discipleship and teaching, anger, shame, anxiety, and sadness kept coming up. And then in our studies of the Enneagram going back over 20 years, the Enneagram is organized around those first 3 emotions of distress. And so of the 9 Enneagram types, there are 3 that are in the anger or gut triad, and 3 that are in the shame or heart triad, and 3 that are in the anxiety or head triad. And what we've learned is that personality is very much distorted and damaged by emotions of distress that we have not processed, not gotten empathy for, not received grace for, not integrated truth with that. And so when we, so much of our personality, we like to think of personality as a happy thing, but the thing that we like, one of the things that we really appreciate about the Enneagram is it helps us to see the disorder and dysfunction and sin that's ingrained in our personalities that we're unconscious of. And see, that's the thing with these emotions, is that they hide, and they hide behind each other. They stack. And so sometimes we have one of these emotions, but then there's other ones underneath. And so being able to name the emotions, and we give with these are 4 categories of emotions, and there are many specific emotions underneath them. And going back into studying the scripture, different examples, as we've said, from Jesus, but in other places in the scripture, to even use the Hebrew words and what do those words mean, and getting at a more biblical understanding of our emotions is really helpful. So we just saw that every person that came into our office, whether the therapy office or the church office, was dealing with anger, shame, anxiety, and sadness. And that sadness in particular is especially important and it's very tender, very shy. And so sadness especially tends to hide under the others. And so underneath anger, shame, and anxiety is sadness, which is hurt, loss, grief, unmet needs, disappointment. And when we can get a read on our sadness and a free expression of that with someone who is curious and warm-hearted, gives empathy and validation, so much healing can flow from that, from the care that we receive, the insight that we gain, and integrating that part of ourself into our personality. See, a lot of us tend to think of emotions like anger, shame, anxiety, sadness. We sort of think of them like they're a nuisance or a bother, or we just kind of want to get past that, or just think positive thoughts, or act in a constructive way, and then it'll go away. And it will go away out of consciousness, but it just goes into our unconscious, which is essentially our body. And the Enneagram personality types are 9 different ways that we deny and defend against sin, emotion, stress, and things like this. And so what is unconscious, it will come out in our relationships, it'll come out in our prayers, it'll come out in our reading of the scripture, but we don't realize it. That's the problem. And so a lot of what we're doing in our book, Healthy Feelings, Thriving Faith, is putting words to what we didn't have words for. Because when I know, okay, this is anger, I thought it was just anxiety, but actually there's anger in there. And then I can pray that, or I can share that with a friend. That really helps me. And it can help me now begin to find constructive, assertive behavior instead of just being repressed with anger or reacting to anger.
So you speaking to the fact that these are kind of the core, especially that the Enneagram speaks to these main emotions, but I would resonate to you. 20 years of working with clients and both leadership development and in my counseling practice, ditto. Yes. Underneath the root, I always call them like the root issues versus the weeds. We all want the weeds to go away, but if we can get down into those roots and really nurture and pluck out some things and replace or heal, we're going to see different fruit grow from those roots, right? So, but you talk a lot about anxiety as well in your book, and nobody really is arguing with the fact that we have anxiety problems right now. It's through the roof. I think anxiety was around before 2020. But it really became more conscious, to use your term, Bill, I think, to the general population of like, everybody's anxious. I think we're anxious about being anxious. So speak a little bit to your lens about how you maybe would encourage, bring along, comfort the anxiety that people are feeling. So talk a little bit through that, and then we'll move towards the Enneagram a little bit.
Well, one of the things that we write about is that anxiety is often from repressed emotions. We commonly hear people say, I'm so stressed out. But the reality is they're stressed in. When we deny our emotions and our fears, they tend to get stored, like Bill illustrated, in our body. Or we use other defense mechanisms to repress our emotions, and we can become very busy to try to ignore those emotions, very distracted, overly focused on problem solving or planning or achieving, different ways of trying to manage that anxiety and those emotions. Oftentimes it's with food, shopping, work, other compulsive behaviors, or even substances are things that can be ways we're denying that anxiety, ways we're trying to ignore it rather than really look deeper at what is the root of the anxiety. Where is their emotions that actually would be very helpful for me to understand and to bring into the light of God's love and grace and truth? Where are there some emotions that I need empathy for, some of the fear that I'm feeling?
Yeah, anxiety is something so many people feel and don't realize that, as we were saying, emotions are stacking, and inside that anxiety might be repressed anger, or feelings of shame, inadequacy, or the ungrieved grief. And anxiety and depression so often go together. And so getting handholds here, names and understanding the nuances of the emotion. And each Enneagram type experiences these emotions in different ways. And so that's a primary thing that we're helping each person to understand so that they can find those words. And that's so helpful then in our relationships with our spouse, our family, our friends, and with God.
I love it.
This has been so helpful to us in our leadership, in our parenting, and all the work that we do. So in our book, Healthy Feelings, Thriving Faith, we have a chapter on anxiety, on fear, on anger, on sadness, on shame, and then also help for anxiety, help for anger, help for shame. And then the sadness and tools and helps to really do that important work of grief and receiving the grace that we need to grow.
Love it. It's such a beautiful resource. And honestly, I hear you're really helping people, one, approach our emotions with a posture of grace and care, comfort, to not fear them, being able to put words to what is actually going on and permission, and then maybe a roadmap to how to help bring comfort and care. And in many cases, resolve, not in all cases. Sometimes we do have a repeat of, I laugh because I'm like, I thought I dealt with that anxiety, which in your words, there's a lot more underneath. And I've learned to just say that is a way that it's a siren that shows up in me as a cue that now it's time to do some more work. Doesn't mean I conquered it. It's more of an invitation to come draw near back to the Lord and to those in my wake who come alongside and care for me. So just that invitation is what this book seems to be a great resource for. Talk a little bit about the Enneagram. Now, be honest with you. Enneagram is a beautiful, beautiful tool, but it takes a long time for people to really understand it and to use it well. And from the spiritual directors in my world have often said it's about a 2-year journey of spiritual formation. So when I say I want to be honest, I'm like, when I ask you to explain it to us, I don't expect you to just unravel it all in the next couple minutes. But for the layperson who doesn't know much about the Enneagram, how is this a resource? What would you want them to know about it? And how is it, if you can walk us through all 9 and their emotional connection, that would be amazing. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, well, we train spiritual directors and pastors and missionaries and small group leaders and parents in the Enneagram. And that's a big part of why we wrote the book. We have a video course that goes with it. We have a supplemental book called Your Enneagram Map.
Beautiful.
That goes deeper into providing some coaching tools and discipleship tools for really understanding it. It does take some time to learn it. So, but it is so worthwhile. In terms of the fruit that we gain from that, of self-awareness and understanding the people I'm in relationship with. And it's an indispensable tool when we're helping other people, shepherding other people in any way. When you can get a beat on what their Enneagram type is, a whole world opens up to you. So yeah, the examples are always so helpful. So I'm an Enneagram 1, and the 1 in the Enneagram is typically called the perfectionist. I didn't like that title. It's kind of a negative title. The other 8 don't have a negative title. So we titled the 1 the reformer.
You even want to reform the title.
That's right. Give a positive title there, because 1's just love to improve things. And for every type, we make it as simple as you can make it by giving a theme for that personality type. And so for the Enneagram 1s, it's everything can be improved. 1s are just great at spotting problems and fixing them. But that also becomes a burden. And there is the root sin of resentment. Every type has a root sin, a besetting sin. And it's something that we don't want to admit about ourselves. So when we were learning the Enneagram over 20 years ago, Kristi could immediately tell I was a 1, and she was reading me about the Enneagram 1, the perfectionist. And I said, I'm not a 1. I don't struggle with anger. I don't have the root sin of resentment. I don't like this theory. Who needs it? And then I listen to myself. Anger. A little bit of anger there in my reaction. And so I wanted to be the Enneagram 3, the achiever, the performer. Now, if you're an Enneagram 3, you're aware of all your struggles with shame and deceit, and you're like, that's not such a great thing either. And that's the challenge in the Enneagram, is you've got to be willing to take a sober look at the personality types and realize that, yeah, there's some really good stuff, and that we're created in the image of God, and we're going to discover that along the way. But we're going to need to do some archaeology, some gardening. We're going to need to dig in and get at some roots, like you're saying, Tara, and pull out some stuff. And so for the one, it's that resentment, and it's the way that anger is being dealt with. That's the core hurt. And for ones, their secondary emotion, and for each type we talk about sort of the primary emotion, the secondary. The secondary is shame, because the ones, we have a stress line to the Enneagram 4, which is the individualist. And so this is one of the really powerful things that we unpack, is that for every type under stress, your type shifts into becoming somewhat like another Enneagram type in unhealth. And so for the ones, that's the 4, and that's a shame type. And everyone I've ever talked to is self-critical and sees their faults and their inadequacies and compares himself to other people and struggles with shame. And so getting handholds for that, words for that, is so valuable. And then one of the best things that we do for each of the types that's a real helpful takeaway is we give you an emotional alarm. You were talking earlier, Tara, about the sirens. We need to hear a siren, or sometimes the analogy of the light on the dashboard, that's flashing red, engine oil low, check your engine. Every personality type has a particular weakness or problem that can be viewed as a wake-up call. So for the ones, it's feelings of personal obligation. We want to do things right. We want to improve things. And there's always more that can be done better and be done right. And in our relationships and in our teaming and work, this can become a problem, because ones will take more than their fair share and think I got to do it. I got to fix the problem. I can make it right. I know I can figure this out. And just take too much on themselves that's a burden and wears them down. And then another takeaway for every personality type, and using the example of the one, is the soul care practice. We can predict for each type one soul care practice that's going to be especially important. All the soul care practices and spiritual disciplines are good for all of us, but there's one, it's kind of like you don't pass go, you don't collect $200 if you don't do this one. And for the ones, it's abandoning outcomes to God. And a lot of us haven't thought of that as a spiritual discipline or soul care practice, but when you're someone who is a high control person, and you want to do it right, you want to have it be excellent, you want to please people and get respect. There's a lot of ways that we're trying to get control here, which, by the way, creates a lot of anxiety. We talk about anxiety as a disorder of control, trying to control people and situations.
Yeah.
So abandoning outcomes is releasing the results to God, to the sovereign Lord. And as ones learn to do that, it brings such peace and such joy, and it helps them to find their growth line, which is to the healthy 7. Because just as each type has one other type that they tend to gravitate towards in stress and becomes a problem for them, there's another type that when they're relaxed, when they're at their best, they're able to integrate the strengths from that type, and they especially need that. And for the ones, it's the 7, which is known as the enthusiast. Because we ones, we need that joy, the spontaneity, the lightheartedness that 7s can bring so naturally. And so that joy comes to us in the serenity and peace as we abandon outcomes to God. But we got to wake up. We got to hear that wake up call. Wait a minute, personal obligation rising here. Stop.
Yeah, so Bill's illustrating here the power of the Enneagram rightly used. It's very deep, and the knowledge that it provides us is really helpful, but it's disarming, because what the Enneagram is based on is it's our personality organized to defend against our root sin and driven by our root sin to try to get our needs met. And so therefore it's an incredible help for spiritual and emotional growth, because it shows us areas where we have unconscious sin operating in our motivation. And we certainly can't repent and change if we're not aware of what that sin is, if we're defending against it. The other thing that's really powerful about it is it's a great tool for understanding and loving our neighbor. And so this is great in organizational leadership, business leadership. We use it a lot there too, because it can help us to understand the underlying motivations of other people who are different types and have different root sins and different emotional alarms, and help us to cooperate with Jesus' grace in their life. Now, because it's so powerful, it can be really dangerous if misused. And we see a lot of wrong use, or even using it kind of just to box people in, or kind of laugh about it, or make fun of it, or just lightly only look at the strengths. And that's really too bad, because if we really come to understand the power of the tool, it's very transformational. It's been very helpful for us in our own growth, spiritually, emotionally, and relationally, in our marriage, in our parenting. It's been so helpful to us in understanding our kids and understanding, not being offended by the ways that they react in ways that are very different than us because we've misinterpreted or misunderstood it or personalized it, or we've projected onto them the way that we think or feel or would view things, because our Enneagram type is a lens. It's a way we see and perceive the world and others, and even God. And so that's one of the things we address in our book too, is Jesus as the perfection of each of the 9 types, as well as how to grow to be more like Jesus and healthy in our type. So we give examples of different Bible characters for each type. We give examples of Jesus displaying the virtue of each type. And we also talk a lot about empathy for each of the types, ways that we can receive empathy and agree with God's grace for us in our areas of greatest woundedness and need.
I so appreciate the care of which you are trying to bring the Enneagram forward. I have 2 questions that I'm holding right now, and so we'll address one. I have to slow down. That's part of my slow down, Tara. The one is for the voice out there who has either had the Enneagram used harmfully and so has some really negative connotations with it, or is concerned. Your guys are connecting the dot beautifully with Jesus and God's design and a Christian worldview. But some think it's not biblical and it could be dangerous. We're messing with something that's from another religion altogether. Speak to that and help bring some clarity.
Thank you for voicing those concerns. Really appreciate that. I have empathy for people with these questions because I had them myself. When we first were introduced to it about 30 years ago, we were kind of skeptical of it. We were looking at really validated tests in psychology and measures, and we're kind of, I don't know, this kind of seems out there. Is this even okay for Christians to engage with? We kind of wrote it off, didn't really look into it until we had some friends who we saw were really growing tremendously and began to talk to us about all that they were learning. And as we saw that, we began to see the fruit of it and look a little deeper to it. And we found out that actually the Enneagram goes back to the early church fathers, where they were looking at the 7 deadly sins. And each personality type is based on one of those, and then added 2 more to those. And then also it is an open system theory. So many religions over the history have found it valuable and have spoken into it. So it's like the internet. It's like technology that we're using right now. It can be used for good or for evil. It can be used rightly or it can be misused. And sometimes the misuse will lead us to, in fear, go to no use. But what we really want to aim at is the right use under the Lord and with the Lord, for his glory. And that's what we have found it to be very helpful for, and as we have given our attention to it and how it's consistent with the scriptures, we found it to be very fruitful for our discipleship to Jesus.
We teach that all truth is God's truth. And so wherever that comes from, if it's true, God is the author behind it. And the Bible is our standard and our authority, but not all truth in the universe is written down in the Bible. And so there are a lot of true things that we can learn about our personality, our relationships, even our faith from a tool like the Enneagram. However, the Enneagram is open enough, as Kristi said, or neutral enough that different thinkers, different worldviews, different types of teachers use it. And even some of the Christian teachers that use it don't seem to be really sourcing their thinking in Scripture and sourcing their goal in Jesus. And so we always need to go back to the Bible and whatever we are learning or hearing from people to make sure that we're in sync with the things that God teaches. But we have found the Enneagram to be an invaluable tool for spiritual and emotional growth. And so that's why we've used it in our Soul Shepherding Institute retreats and in our 2-year certificate training in spiritual direction, because it just opens up so much insight for our spiritual directors into the people that they're caring for and how to guide them, because now you have a roadmap to walk with people.
Well, I have about 20-year engagement with Enneagram. Being in Portland, Oregon area, spiritual direction really comes out. West Coast, you guys are in California, correct? So West
Yes.
Coast, we've been a little more open to spiritual formation, spiritual direction, and now we're seeing it move into the more of the rest of the country. But in terms of the dialogue, so there's two things I hear. And so since you're with me, I'm just going to ask you and see what you say. So one, John Mark Comer and I actually had a conversation about this, but we were laughing because when we were taught the Enneagram or exposed to it, you weren't supposed to go around telling everybody your number. And now I think that's how people introduce themselves. Hi, I'm Tara, and I'm a 7. I'm like, you just told me your sin nature, like right off the bat, which I love the vulnerability. So, but we went from this is a journey with you and the Lord and a mentor in your spiritual formation to now we're using it church staffs and exposing. And as a trauma therapist, there is a little bit of a protection I have for people to say, you want to be thoughtful about who you're showing your pearls to. So speak to that, because I go, the Enneagram feels so sacred to me, and yet it's become such a beautiful tool and we want to use it everywhere. So what would you say to that old saying of you're not supposed to share your number, tell people your number? I don't know where that came from, by the way.
Well, it really depends upon who the person is and if that's a safe person that's respectful, gracious, gives empathy. One of our senior spiritual directors on our staff recently led a whole nonprofit staff through the Enneagram. And so each person on the staff learned their Enneagram number and learned each other's.
Okay.
But there had to be ground rules here for graciousness and acceptance, and never using information against someone. Oh, well, because you struggle with resentment, I can see that now. You're being kind of sour. You need to take care of that. Nobody wants to be boxed in and judged like that. That's not loving. That's not what Jesus would do. And so it's a fundamental principle we've used it for years in marriage counseling, with families, but friendship. But whenever somebody is vulnerable, you always want to treat that with great respect and tenderness. Be gentle with somebody's weakness, and because of the power of the Enneagram, it is revealing a lot. But what I've decided and what I've realized is that it's sort of like that old fable: the emperor has no clothes. They're going to see my weaknesses, so why dress it up and hide it? And so if I'm able to be in grace about that, and not be in insecurity and fear about it, because I know that I'm loved and I'm learning and growing in my discipleship to Jesus, then I can admit that. And I can say, yeah, I struggle with resentment. And I'm thankful that the Enneagram has helped me. The Lord has helped me through the Enneagram, so that's less of a problem for me than it used to be, because it's not so unconscious anymore. Now I'm more aware of it.
Yeah. And the other thing about, and I love your heart for and concern for protecting people with this, is we really talk a lot about empathy and using this tool as a tool of empathy, because it's very powerful to understand people and their wounds and why sometimes they react in ways that are even hurtful or unhealthy, and can really facilitate more empathy, more cooperation with God's love and truth and grace in our relationships, as well as being able to receive and agree with that for ourselves in our own areas of need.
The Enneagram has helped me when I look at somebody else, and if I have an idea what their type is, or they've told me what it is, and so I'm sort of tuned into their root sin or their core dysfunction, the Enneagram has really helped me in that it has humbled me. And I know how hard it has been for me to overcome my repressed anger or my perfectionism or getting grumpy and sour about things or overworking. I know how much I've needed grace in that area, in the process that I've been in to find more joy, more relationality, more freedom. And so it helps me give other people that same grace. And it helps me that to not just see their weakness, but then to see the positive that they bring, because every type has a virtue, a strength, divine potentials. And as we get to know ourselves, and as we are walking with Jesus and someone who's safe, talking with a spiritual director, it helps to unleash these positive aspects of our personality, including the positive emotions that we want to feel.
I love it. It's really amazing. Okay, I'm hogging all of these questions for myself, but in helping our audience, I'm listening to different dialogues with different leaders, and so one of the issues that I have personally had, and we'll end here, and then I want people to know more about where to find you. But over the 20 years, every assessment that I've ever taken to the Enneagram, I'm really exposing myself here. I end up with different numbers. And I've heard two responses on that. One is, you'll know. So I've done listening to the songs, I've done the assessments, and my clinical brain goes, the stats on this is really hard because it's 100-year-old tool and everyone's using it different ways. So I come up with all the different numbers there, and the spiritual directors have really encouraged me, like, try this, try that. You'll know, discern. And I relate to every sin, every single one. And so I've had two responses. I don't know if I like either one. One response was, Tara, you're just so aware that you just can connect with all the, and I'm like, I'm not sure I'm that aware, but I am a marriage and family therapist and spent many years in this stuff. The second one is, you don't really know yourself. So they're opposite answers. And I just want to know, what's my problem? Because I've actually had clients in similar situations, and I don't know. I'm not trained fully like you are in Enneagram. So my question is, what happens? Where do you take the most accurate read? Because Bill, you know you're a 1, but I struggle with that, and I struggle with the 7, and I struggle with the 8, and I struggle with the 6, and sometimes I can be a 4, but not. People think I'm a 2 or a 3, so I laugh. I'm like, what am I?
Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for your vulnerability and your courage. And a lot of people relate to that, because the strength of the Enneagram, one of the strengths of the Enneagram, also makes it a challenge, which is it's very much not boxy. It's very much accounting for the complexity in personality and the different types. And so part of the answer is that we all have more than one type in us. So if you're a 7, you could have an 8 and or a 6 wing. And so right there's 3 types that you're sort of moving behind, with the foundation and home type being the 7. But as we explain in our book, and then also in our other book, Your Enneagram Map, we have T-charts for every type compared to every other type, where we compare the primary features side by side to help you look at that. But the 7 often mistypes with the 3 because they're both very positive and enthusiastic types.
Love it.
7s also with the 2s often mistype. And so there are some significant comparisons there. But I mean, if we had time for like a more extensive conversation, I would ask you a number of different questions that would we'd compare like the triad. If you're a 7, you're in the head triad. But if you were an 8, you'd be in the gut triad, or even a 9. You didn't mention 9, but 9s will feel like they're every type around the clock face. because they merge, and
Behaviors,
they've
yeah.
got a lot of all the types in them, and they can be malleable and see the good in so many different people and situations and so forth. And so if you're a 3 or a 2, you're in the heart triad. And so each of the triads have a different core emotion. So the 7 deals a lot with anxiety. The 7s are multitaskers, and they have trouble with attention. Their attention flits about from here to there. The 2s and 3s struggle a lot more with shame. And you mentioned 4, especially the 4, and comparison. And so we would try to differentiate between which triad fits best. And then we would look at things like, okay, well, which root sin is more a struggle for you? And then we would look at like, okay, well, which stress line? Because at the end of the day, what I always say, and this is our emphasis in teaching it, is that what you're looking for is your Enneagram map. The title of our second book. You're looking for, when you find the best fitting type, and there could be truth in more than one type for you, because that's the complexity of human personality. But when you find the type that's the best fitting, what opens up to you is the simplicity in the complexity. Because now you know, okay, this is my type, and here's the things that my type struggles with. Here's a wing. Here's my stress line. In stress, I tend to go down this gutter. Here's my growth line, what I can especially aspire to and learn from, to be more like Jesus, to be more healthy, more loving in my type. And so you want that simplicity, because now I don't need to think about so much. I just need to remember, Bill, find your 7, find the smile, find the joy, find the spontaneity. And then that moderates my earnestness as a 1, and how hard I work, and that I want to do it right. And I want to teach all the principles and help people understand, which is a good thing. But sometimes we need to slow it down and laugh, or interact and get relational, or do something experiential. And my 7 helps me find that.
Yeah.
I'll also say, Tara, that it took me a couple years to find my type. I had been reading about them all in lots of books. I'd taken lots of tests. I had tried on some of the different numbers to see if that map really did fit for me, if it was working for me. It was helpful, but it wasn't as powerful as when I really landed on my number. And we don't want to see ourselves. It's exposing. We feel naked. It's painful to stare our roots in the face. So we're really defended against seeing it. And I certainly was defended against seeing it. And so it does take a long time. You were really helpful to me, as was a spiritual director helpful to me, and very gently helping me to see some of my defense mechanisms, some of the things that I was not really wanting to own, and to see that were so core to my type. But it's been so helpful, so validating of some of the things that drive my unconscious behaviors, ways I'm trying to secure myself, that actually get in the way of my leaning on it, depending upon and looking to Christ.
Very true. Yeah. Well, thank you for entertaining my bigger question. To land the plane, I have landed on where I really do think my number is and my wings. And but it was a long journey. And it's partly why we use the core values index, because we aren't always in sacred spaces. We do a lot of work in secular marketplace work with leaders who don't have a faith system with Jesus per se. And but the core values index is a very matter of fact kind of, here's where you are. And often people will ask me, are they the same thing, or you work together? And so here's how I've explained it: is the core values index gives us a language for our wiring, our hardcore wiring. And there's darker sides. There's the false self. It's called conflict strategy. There's a lot of depth to it as well, but it's a 10-minute assessment. You get it. It's a 97% reliability. So it's not going to change very much over the years. The Enneagram is a beautiful tool. I don't know if I'm using the right word, tool, but a vehicle to be really, to really help us do the healing of our woundedness. CVI isn't getting to the woundedness. It will show us how we react when we're wounded, but it doesn't necessarily go towards the wound itself. And so I always say, I imagine it that our CVI, our core value, our wiring, meshed with our story, our family of origin, popped out the Enneagram number. And that's often what we get, the mix, the combination there of the potential 9. That's my theory. Doesn't mean it's accurate. But the Enneagram is such a gift. It takes time. We want to be thoughtful with it, but you've given us some incredible tools, these books, and also the resource of your schooling, your retreats. Tell us more about that if someone is interested in exploring more there, and where they can find your books and your trainings as well.
Yeah, our ministry is soul shepherding. You can just go to soulshepherding.org, and we have the Soul Shepherding Institute, which is 4 5-day-long retreats in spiritual formation, spiritual and psychological development, soul care ministry, and relationally healthy leadership. Each retreat's in a beautiful setting. Most people do all 4 in sequence in a cohort, but we always have guests and visitors. You can start anytime. You can come to any retreat. And then you can add on a certificate in spiritual direction. It's a 2-year program, and that is done mostly online. The retreats are in person or online, and so you can do the whole spiritual direction certificate program online. And we have people from around the world who've done the Soul Shepherding Institute. Right now, we have 150 students in our 2-year program earning a certificate in spiritual direction. We also have a certificate in coaching that we offer. And then some of the people that we train come onto our Soul Shepherding staff, and they work as spiritual directors or coaches. And we now have almost 60 spiritual directors and coaches who are on our team, helping us to care for pastors and missionaries and ministry spouses and all kinds of leaders and Christ followers who need a safe place, need someone to give them empathy and support them. And our approach to spiritual formation and spiritual direction is unique in that we are really integrating the Jesus-centered psychology in that. And so if you just go to soulshepherding.org, you'll find that. The book that we've been talking about, Healthy Feelings, Thriving Faith, that's available wherever books are sold. Or if you want to do a deep dive on the Enneagram, go to soulshepherding.org/Enneagram. There you'll find the main book. You'll find also your Enneagram map. You'll find a link to our Enneagram and Emotions assessment that's free, and you get immediate results and you get recommendations on that. It'll show you your scores for all the different types. And in our assessment, every question is based on your emotions that go with your type.
Love the integration.
We also have a podcast.
Oh, you have a podcast. Tell us about that.
We do. Soul Talks with Bill and Kristi Gaultiere. That's available anywhere podcasts stream, as well as on our website.
And you're just talking more and more about all of these pieces that you're bringing to the table. I really love the integration.
Everything's spiritual formation and psychology and soul care. Bill and I were blessed to be mentored by Dallas and Jane Willard. Jane also is a therapist, and Dallas with his great integration of philosophy and spiritual formation. So we've just received so much from them, and we're so blessed to have them pass the baton to us. And it's been working through our lives and sharing it through our lives and our unique personality and discipleship, as well as through our experience as pastors and therapists.
It's a beautiful blend, and your kindred hearts with Jeff and I. If he was here, he'd be so excited. The piece that I love too is it's a la carte. So if somebody wanted to just participate in one piece, whether that's the free resources online or certification or come to the retreats, or I'm imagining if they want a spiritual director, they can go to your website and maybe access the team that you have. That would be a safe and trusted referral there.
Yeah, right now you can book an appointment with one of our spiritual directors.
Wonderful.
You can search for certain expertise or criteria. You could read about them. You can book an appointment right from our website.
Beautiful. Okay, well, this conversation has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for all that who you are, to be honest, is where I want to start. Just who you are, the example together, and again, the mutual journey that you've been on, and allowing God to use you, and all of your story and how he's brought you here. Why don't you leave our listeners with one last word of encouragement? Anything else that you felt like wasn't said? And we'll go on our way today.
Well, I just want to encourage you that as you're on this journey with the Living Wholehearted podcast and Tara and Jeff, and as you're becoming more aware of yourself and your emotions and your struggles, that you have the opportunity to be Christ's ambassador in your circle of influence and shine the light of Jesus. And primary way to do that is with empathy. It's how we listen. It's the questions we ask. It's how we pray for people, even secret prayers. And so empathy is really the heart and soul of what we teach in soul shepherding, in our institutes. And so the experience and the learning is transferable to every relationship we have, everything we do in life.
And Jesus has empathy for you and your unique challenges, wounds, pains, and even the opportunities and some of the stresses that go along with that. Mm-hmm. So continue to lean into him. Glad that you are getting help and following Jesus together with Jeff and Tara.
Thank you for your time today. And if you're listening, send this off to someone else that maybe you're thinking about that could really benefit. Visit Bill and Kristi's website. All of this will be in the show notes. And always can continue to join us at thelivingwholehearted.com. Join our monthly newsletter where we're continuing to encourage you, and you'll find all of our services and resources for you as well. We're so grateful that you're with us along the way. Hi from Jeff, and we'll connect with you next time. Well, we had such a hard time with that recording. There was internet interference and we were in delay, but to our wonderful producer, we were able to salvage a majority of that conversation. So I hope that you benefited. And if you are wanting to grow in your own ability to process your emotions, emotions play a huge part in us becoming more wholehearted and more whole, mind, body, heart, and soul. As you have learned in this conversation, they play a huge role in our journey, in our parenting, in our leadership, in our marriages. If you want to grow, go to livingwholehearted.com, and we want to walk alongside you. Both our professional counselors, we have executive coaches, and we do a lot of this work in your organizations and in your marriages and with your families. I love having you join us each and every time. And if you want to leave a review or share this with another, we'd be honored. And until next time, continue growing and becoming the leader that you would follow.
Well, did you know that we're not just podcasters? One of the best ways to connect with Tara and I and our whole team at Living Wholehearted is our website, livingwholehearted.com. There you're going to find the books that we've written, our e-courses, executive coaching, organizational development, and professional counseling services. And then one of our favorite things that we're up to these days, our Wholehearted Leadership Cohorts, where we take groups of leaders for 1 to 2 year journeys together. It's amazing. While you're there, for fresh content, make sure that you sign up for our e-newsletter. That's where we're putting out stuff every month that you want to keep close with. So visit livingwholehearted.com.
You can also join us on socials at living_wholehearted on Instagram, and we are Living Wholehearted on Facebook. You can also follow me at Tara Matson on Instagram. We love to engage with you personally there, so make sure you reach out. Leave us a review if you're enjoying this podcast.
Hey, thank you for caring about being the kind of person and leader that lives with integrity.